that there's been a history of oppression, and oppression has an order, and the oppressive order begins with lies, misinformation, and half truths, and they get pumped into the community and saturate the community repeatedly over time. So the target population starts to actually believe the lies and starts acting out, and it manifests itself in their behaviors. And part of the lies is to turn folks against each other, whether it be the men against the women, the darker skin against the lighter skin, the elders against the children. And really, what is it? And we internalize these messages and we start to believe these lies, right? And so the only way we can get back and find our way back home, and I mean home in a very kind of in a metaphoric kind of way, right? Find our way back home, the last place we felt safe and secure and felt like we had purpose and felt we had happiness and harmony. And some of us never had a home like that, right? So I'm talking about figuratively is through really truth telling. And that is, in essence, what justice is. Justice is seeking truth. And I've always appreciated those truth tellers. And so I feel as though all the things that we're experiencing here in Stockton are a manifestation of these lies. We are the last refuge. We are the place where folks are being gentrified into, where they don't. This Stockton is not the place of first choice. It is the place of last resort for people. We know that, but there's still something happening here in Stockton that is amazing, and it's a revolution of the spirit and the mind. It's a revolution of the people's will to resist. And you see that because when you have nothing else left, and all you have is the honor and the will to survive and the will to fight back, and that's a very powerful force, right? But yeah, so our mantra here is we protect children, we honor women, and we respect our elders. The basics, right? Things that we've heard throughout our lives, but things that we need to be reminded of, because those lies that we've been pummeled with over time. Women don't trust men here, right? In our community, men are deadbeat, no good. The children are the problem. The elders don't have a place. What do we need? And everyone just seems disposable. So then who's left? Except the oppressor, right? The oppressive forces that created this lie, that I think at times even they don't realize that in order to hold us down, you got to get up in this ditch with us and get dirty too. So it's about also relieving them of their oppressive chains as well. So there's been a history, and certainly Stockton is on this amazing kind of journey that we've been on, where we've been number one in all the things that we don't want to be in, number one, and last in things that are quality of life indicators and issues. So I think that, and I say all this to say that, brother, you're doing exactly what you should be doing by answering the phone when your mom calls. You know what I mean? It's like, this is exactly how we're responsive. We are, the three teachings are you show up, you pay attention, you speak the truth. If we just do that, show up, pay attention, and speak the truth, everything else, I believe, falls into place. But I'm sure you have questions, so no. I'm ranting now. Please.
No, that was very good. So can you, Sammy, talk a little bit about why, the organization was created? And the need do you feel it fills in the community of Stockton?
So I'm the founder of the organization, but I have to admit that I'm just the one that acted on an impulse and a hunch.
Always a great way to go.
Always a great way to go. So I, as a child growing up, obviously, saw a lot of things. I guess. Saw a lot of the same things that a lot of young men of color are witnessing, right? Saw almost, seemingly overnight, men just being wiped out. Like, they were just gone. Where did the men go in our communities, right? And we blamed them, the men. We didn't see beyond their actions and the fact that they were just missing, and we left a huge vacuum in our lives. A lot of me and my friends, my peers, and certainly in all kinds of neighborhoods like mine, that were devastated, that had really punctuated poverty, and very an illusion of living under this illusion of scarcity. And so when we saw the men leave, one thing that we learned the hard way was that when we allowed them to leave for whatever reason, whether it was by choice or not so much by choice, but by virtue of over policing and certain certain tactics and strategies that were about our public safety, our safety. And so it wasn't by virtue of a choice, but rather by because you were unsafe to be in this neighborhood, and we're going to extract you from it and put you somewhere else in confinement. So whether it was through incarceration and all these different policies. At that point, we didn't know the policies that play. We didn't understand that. We were children. All we see was men were gone, and so we had to organize ourselves, right? We had to organize ourselves, and these later became called gangs, right? And so it was through this experience that I started realizing in that it definitely materialized in certain kind of fatalistic and kind of attitudes and behaviors in our community, especially with our young men. And so as a young man, I saw these things. I lived in a neighborhood where violence was the norm. You had to at least be violent enough to protect yourself in these neighborhoods. And so I basically reacted. And I projected back to the world what I felt it projected upon me, which was pain and shame. And I fought back the only way I knew how. A young person, and as MLK said, violence is a tool of the inarticulate. So I didn't know how to articulate my pain. I didn't understand the contextual frameworks that was creating these conditions that we were not responsible for. We were not responsible for the conditions in our neighborhood. These were decisions being made somewhere else, yet we were reacting to these conditions, whether it was over-policing, whether it was a war on drugs, which was, as we know now, looking back on it, was an epic failure, and really was a war on people of color and poor people in our communities. But this hyper-reaction to it resulted in our own criminalization. And really, again, these volatile kinds of circumstances where we reacted with the only way we knew how, which was through violence and through sheer power. And that was the only way I felt at that time we could survive. And so we didn't organize our neighborhoods and our community out of hate. It was actually out of love. It was out of love for one another. Even though we didn't have self-love, I love my brother down the street who has the same struggles as I do. I grew up with him, went to the same schools, had the same circumstances, was abused like he was. Like, we had a lot of common struggle, even if we didn't know how to articulate it. We just kind of had an affinity towards one another, kind of gravitated towards one another. We kind of knew each other through our pain. And as a result of that, grew up in that environment. And so most of my friends fulfilled the prophetic messages they were receiving constantly over time. You're from that neighborhood, you're going to end up dead or in prison by the time you're such and such. So what our dreams were early on as children, just like any child, were, boundless dreams that we had. But those dreams soon become nightmares. And we start to, the dream now, if you ask a child, what do you want to be when you grow up? Typically children will say things like a teacher or a professor or a astronaut or a police officer, or any of these lofty goals that we're taught are like successful indicators of, like, these are indicators of success. And so, but asking those same children like myself, because I'm preceded by that child, what you want to be when you're 15, 16, 17, when now you're a little bit older, you're more, you have the physical characteristics of an adult, yet you're still very much a child in development. You ask them what they want to be, and they want to be alive at 25. They want to be. They don't want to end up in prison or dead. And those are the choices you have over time. Systematically, your dream are just over time just eroded into like just surviving, right? And so when I was in and out. I was in and out of juvenile justice facilities as a young boy. Witnessed atrocities in my neighborhood. Saw people be murdered literally in front of me. Domestic violence was a norm. Seeing my mom being beaten savagely by her then husband, my stepdad, who she remarried after I was born. And then living in the projects, living in those areas. Where we had to organize ourselves, like I said, for survival. We felt compelled to do it, and then there's a lot of angry young men running around, with very little guidance, and not feeling welcome anywhere, and not feeling a sense of purpose. But rather, this gave us a sense of purpose, right? So by the time I was 18 years old, I actually, on January 2nd, 1993, I witnessed the birth of my daughter, right? And that was an amazing transformational period in my life. And I remember the vow I gave her that many boys tell their children when they become parents themselves is that I will never do what he did. I will never abandon you. I will always be here for you. I will never turn my back on you. And you really mean that with all sincerity, with all your heart, right? That I love you. I remember the first time I held her, I didn't even know how to hold my daughter. I'd been through, my hands were used for fighting and hurting, and never for nurturing and for holding. And so I remember holding her and feeling inadequate and scared as hell about it. And then giving her that vow and that promise. By February 13th, literally a few weeks later, I was shot in my neighborhood with a 12-gauge shotgun at point blank range, and almost killed it. Punctured my lung, shattered my collarbone, severed my nerves, and it just went through me, straight through me, my upper torso, and exited out my back. And actually, some of my friends that were there at the time that took off running were hit with the BBs as they exited out my back. I flatlined 4 times, had double my weight in blood. I lost double my weight in blood. So I was, by all intents and purposes, dead on arrival at the hospital. Fortunately, I survived, or at the time I didn't feel so fortunate, certainly, because I think that they don't call it suicide when you stand in front of a 12-gauge shotgun, but what else are you going to call it now? Thinking back on it. Again, fatalistic, extreme behavior, right? Grounded in this pain that had gone unresolved and unchecked. Not even just from me. Little did I know that my dad had the same pain and shame. And his dad probably did as well. There was a history of this beginning with the conquest of our people, right? And so all of that kind of, was a generational kind of pattern that occurred, and it showed up in each generation. Maybe subtle differences, but the reality was the same. And so, I felt, so here I am, a young father, 18 years old, a high school dropout. I made it further than most of my friends. I did my own research on this, and 1 in 3 of my friends ended up with some form of paralysis due to a violent occurrence or incident in their life. So I'm disabled now. And I'm like, what am I going to do next? And at that point, there was 2 groups that came to see me. One was law enforcement. Let's just say they were not trauma informed. They basically reiterated what I felt. Why did you live? Why couldn't you have died? You should have died. And I bet you're not even going to tell on the guys that shot you, are you? Because you're no good gang member. And I was very made to feel inadequate. It caused a nervous breakdown in my mom at that moment, because she was just appalled by the way they were conducting it. Very aggressive. Came in like many of them. And there was a gang task force. So they came in like a tougher gang. Like, that's the mentality. Is like, I'm a tougher gang. We're tougher gang members than you guys are, right? And so they didn't see a victim in me. They didn't see somebody who had gone through, a near-death experience that was just traumatized and scared, right, about what the future holds for me. And so basically, they left largely because the medical staff ushered them out because it was causing so much anxiety. And the next group of people that came in were my friends, and they were not trauma informed either, right? So they're like, let's go get them. Retaliation is a must, right? These are de facto policies in these communities. And so that experience led me to like kind of start realizing, like, man, how can I be a good father to my child when I'm so like, where am I going? I don't even know where I'm going in life. I have no sense of direction. I survived this ordeal. And what am I going to do next? So I began, and after actually, I have to be completely honest and say I did retaliate, and I ended up having some time to reflect, and during this time of reflection, I was given an opportunity to educate myself, and it was really a lot of it was really my own sense of self-discovery, and reclaiming a sense of dignity. in sense of a sense of like my own respect, a sense of love for myself, and a newfound love for my community. And during this time, I came across actually in this institution. I came across. I had this teacher, a retired professor, Dr. Covell, and she would teach us. She was like a really stern, old school English professor, tough as nails. Like English professors are no joke. They're like, they thought she was tougher than any gang member I ever encountered in the yard or outside in my neighborhood. But I remember the first time I wanted to go see her, and she told me to sit somewhere where I felt like I was sitting next to what my perceived enemy was. And she said, "You go sit right there, Nunez." And I said, "I'm not gonna sit there." And she goes, "We have a choice right now. You can either sit there, or you can go back to your cell." And I said, "That's not much of a choice." She goes, "But you still have a choice. Make the choice, Mr. Nunez." And I go, "You're talking about choice, and you're not giving much of a choice." She goes, "It doesn't matter. You always have choices. What choice are you going to choose today? What are you going to choose today?" And I just kept on replaying this, and I said, I just was angry because I didn't know how to respond. Because she had me, it's like, "Gotcha. Like, you have a choice right now. What are your choice?" And I never felt that I had a choice, I guess. So all this to say that I went through the program, was exposed to some of the, literary greats, and learned how to articulate.
This is an educational program in
Folsom.
In
Folsom State Prison. 18 years old, just coming out of this ordeal, tried for attempted murder, because I retaliated. Thank God I didn't hit anybody, and because I would see the light of day again, and so I absorbed. And when I got there, it was two choices: you can either go to prison industries and get paid 19 cents an hour, or you can go to education and you get the halftime, but you're going through education. My mom didn't raise a fool. I'm like, I'll go the education route if I have a choice. And like I said, that's what I learned about Shakespeare. All of them, all of the late greats of the super text that stand the test of time, right? So, I even, to be or not to be, that came, I never understood that, right, till I was there, and I was like, shit, that's me. To be or not to be, that is the question, whether it's noble in the mind to suffer the stings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles, and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep no more, and by sleep to say within the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. I feel like, man, that's me. I mean, do I want to be or not be? Do I want to live or not live? Do I want to? Is there something for me to provide and contribute? So after I got out, I came, to Stockton, and I quickly started getting involved in community work, and I was working as actually I paroled back to my county in Santa Clara, and then eventually moved to Stockton, and so I was in Santa Clara for a little while, and that's where I began my journey of discovery and trying to find out where can I fit in and make some meaningful contributions to a community that I've taken so much from. And so what I learned, and then transitioning into San Joaquin County and doing some work here, I learned there was a common factor. And the common factor was all these young men, these at-risk young men, came from at-risk families where dad usually was gone. Moms sometimes were gone too, because that's the whole issue. Is like, we allowed them to take dad, and they took mom with them, because mom had to work 2 jobs and any number of things that mom has to do not to survive. And then they lived in at-risk communities. So what came first? The at-risk child or the at-risk community, right? They're not responsible for these conditions. So I started realizing that perhaps we could do a better service, because we're doing all this gang intervention work and youth development work and all this stuff, but perhaps we're missing the mark. Perhaps maybe we should start working with the men, and we work with the men, maybe they can work on the community. And if they work on the community, maybe the children don't have to live in the same adverse conditions that are atrocious, and maybe we can actually make a difference that way. And what was interesting about that was that the name actually drew young people. Like I said, we're still reeling from the policies of yesteryear. All these policies born out of neglect and disparate treatment of our needs, right? Of our needs in our community, um, were done in supposedly to provide safety for us. But if anything, they destabilized their communities even further. There was disinvestment in these communities, and there was over policing, and there was an over reliance on incarceration, and there was a lot of system involved families now. So now you had generations of families in institutions, whether it be the prison system, the correctional system, the juvenile justice system, CPS, foster care, marginalized educational settings, and schools that were poorly resourced, and so that's pretty good. That's a perfect storm, right? Where do you go in a hopeless situation like that, and how can you have hope in such a dark environment, right? And so it was the young men in particular, and the young women, many young women that were touched by juvenile justice, that weren't CPS, have been touched by CPS, and were in marginal educational settings like alternative schools, and certainly were on the fast track to incarceration. If nothing happened in their lives, they would inevitably, surely end up in prison. Like, there's no denying that. And the studies show it, and the facts show it, and their own data showed it. It's like, what do we do? So as the young people come in, and they develop our concept of a youth and family empowerment center that was easily accessible, that had certain principles. And one of the things that we realize is that there's four questions children ask. Am I wanted? Right? Do I have a positive purpose? Do I have a purpose? Where do I go to heal and feel safe? And who can guide me to reach my potential, right? And these are the questions that young people have. So yes, we need to provide a place that answers the question. Yes, you are wanted and you are a blessing. Yes, you have a positive purpose in this world. And yes, you could come to us so we can guide you. This is where you go to get guided and to be in a safe environment that's secure, and where we can get guidance and never doubt the fact that you have ancestral wisdom and teachings in your own culture that promotes healing. And let's reintroduce you to those concepts, right, that promote healing. And so the young people took all of this kind of their pain, and they developed this concept in preparation for their fathers to come home, which was quite interesting. It was the young people that began this work with me. And so they created this. This has been the work over 10 years now that we've been at it. And so this is how Fathers and Families of San Joaquin came into existence. Very long-winded way to answer it, but it's never a short story. It's just, how do you create something that was never there before?
Right.
And a rural institution, right,
yep,
that challenges the status quo. And sometimes, I don't know, people, because we partner with institutions, but then we also challenge them, if that makes any sense, at the same time. And we challenge ourselves too, our own thinking. We challenge we really kind of evaluate our thinking around these issues constantly. Like, are we doing, like you just walked into right there, right? And it becomes somewhat conflict, but it's good kind of conflict. Here's the problem. A lot of our folks think that conflict means violence.
Right.
It doesn't have to mean violence, right? It can actually be a tool that unlocks ideas and brilliance and opportunity and unlocks the potential of people. It doesn't have to mean violence. And that's what we're trying to do, is like, we can have conflict without it resulting in violence. And so this is the space that we created.
What would be a good example of you working with the community to facilitate the understanding that conflict can take the form of conversation instead of violence?
I think number one, that the way we facilitate that process is by facilitated conversations and the art of dialogue, right? Oftentimes we've lost that, right? And it's more like interlocking, kind of like, it's not a dialogue, it's more like interlocking monologues. It seems like people are just talking to get their points across. So there's a way to do it that creates this movement. I think it's not just as simple as creating these conversations. I think the conflict is really good, but the main thing I think that we're conflicted with is ourselves. And I think that creating a space where you have a reflective process where I'm able to now listen, and this is the conversation you just walked into, because one of our guys that just came home, has, and he's a BTDT, what we call a BTDT, been there, done that. And he really is passionate about this to the point that it's overwhelming, that energy. And that energy, that male energy, that fire energy can be warm and nurturing, or it could be overwhelming and burn people and hurt people, right? So how do you tend to that? So that way you can get your point across, but also listen, so you can create dialogue, because you yourself are also in development, right? So I think it happens through a variety of different ways, but one of the main ways is through our own kind of healing circles that we have. It's not therapy, but it's therapeutic. It's person centered, and it allows folks to actually feel as though it's very intentional. It's like since time immemorial, our people have been doing this practice. So it's couched in indigenous practices and theories, and it facilitates that type of dialogue. But it's something that I'm trying to master still, is that facilitative role of and through that process, through our sharing, our expressing ourselves, we're able to heal. At the same time that we're able to get through this conflict, penetrate the conflict, and get to the point where there's mutual understanding, and it creates movement, right? For us, I mean, I'll be the first one to say that words can save people's lives, and sometimes we're so irresponsible with what comes out of our mouth, and it penetrates people, man. And so I think it's really important that we create a space where folks come in. It's funny though, because we had a pre-trauma, pre-therapy set. Now we have clinicians on staff, and it's kind of real cool to have that. And they do these classes, these pre-therapy kind of intro psychoeducation classes, what they call it, right? And I remember sitting in that circle and watching these two young men. I couldn't help but think the first time I sat in a men's circle like that, right? And my feeling at that time when I was fresh out was, man, these. I told my friend that brought me and then invited me, man, these dudes are weird, because they're talking different. They're talking different. They look like me, but they weren't talking the same language. It was not as aggressive. They were talking about their partners in a very different way. They were talking about their community in a very different way that I found strange almost. And I told my friend, I go, man, these dudes are weird, right? And he goes, nah, brother. He said, that's the way we're supposed to be. And I was like, whoa, is that the way we're supposed to be? And I understood language. I started understanding more and more the concept of language, and where it goes, we're gonna follow it, right? And so we have so fast forward now to these young men, all system involved young people, and one of them asked the other one, like, and they're talking about trauma and how trauma shows up, and trauma this and trauma that. We're trauma informed, and how do we heal from that? And the young man asked the other young man, hey, bro, he goes, what's trauma? And the other brother looks and goes, hey, fool, trauma's drama. And he goes, well, shit, I got hella trauma then, because he had hella drama. He didn't associate drama with trauma, right? And so we have a lot of folks that have been under siege for over 30 years. We have been on the menu, but rarely are we at the table. And they discuss us and our safety and ways to intervene in our lives without us being involved in it. I think that time has changed now. I think I was one of the first formerly incarcerated that was leading an agency. I recall I could tell you stories, man, when I'm like, you'd be surprised how many people shut their door in my face that are not like my best friends, right? I remember one time going after some little funding, mini grant, and I had seen some other folks get it that were, let's just say, different orientation, and they got the fund. They got a lot more money than I was asking for, and I was like, man, I've never even heard of these guys. That's cool. There's money here for these programs. So, and I went to them, and I went with a little mini grant, very modest. And I remember taking my suit, and like I only had one suit back then, and going up the stairs to this to talk to one of the commissioners, and I was met at the base of the stairs by an executive director of a very affluent, very powerful nonprofit, and the executive director of the fund in question, right? And they proceeded to meet me with a piece of paper, and they gave me the piece of paper and had my record on there, and I just like felt like this tinge of shame come over me. and inadequacy and inferiority, and I feel like this small, and that really gives way to anger, though, right? It left unchecked, that shame is gonna go somewhere. It's gonna materialize somehow. And I remember asking them, why is, what is this about? Are you really going to ask us for money, Sammy, for this organization, knowing that you have a record? I go, but that was a long time ago. I said, this is not what I do, and this is like, you see the results. We're good at this. Like, we're really good at this. I'm really good at my job. And I remember just like sitting there feeling defeated already. And so we take the elevator all the way to the top to talk to the commissioner. And he proceeds to tell me, who do you think you are signing on contracts? You know you can't sign on contracts. You know what I told him? I'm Sammy Nunez. Who do you think you are? Who the hell are you? And I got mad. I was upset. I was like, I know what discrimination feels like. I felt it many times in my life. And this is discriminatory treatment. And it's really, 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 if it makes me feel bad, I know it's bad. And y'all should feel bad about yourselves too. And I turned on the heel and I said, I don't want your money. I turned on the heel and walked out of there. And then I later realized that's not their money. That is not your money. That is our money. That is our money. That's not your money. But I felt like there was these structural barriers. And there was like, and knowing darn well that like, half of them have done the same things I've done, if not worse, frankly. Some people get caught, some people don't. The reality is though, it really distorted the sense of justice to me and redemption. And I feel like, you know what? We need to do it ourselves. We really need to branch out and create a space for us, by us, with us, where we can really do this. And so that's how we got to really, and when we did that, and when we kind of stepped over on chance and faith, the rest just kind of fell into place. And so there's been a lot of things since then that have kind of contributed to us, but I don't know if I answered the question. I'm so sorry.
No,
what was the question?
You were getting at it, and then I think the other part of that was you had talked about conflict with organizations. So an example of you have someone who supports you, but then also you push back perhaps at their support, or so we were talking about creating a safe space for conflict, and conflict as a opportunity for creating and innovating new solutions.
Absolutely.
So I'll taking that string of thought you were just talking about. So you're interacting with perhaps funders or partners,
politicians at this point, people in positions of power.
Conflict perhaps that then leads to some innovative solution perhaps.
Well, first of all, there one thing that was clear to me is that the power dynamic was not in my favor. And I was still, even though we had evidence of really effective, something growing, something that was like worth looking at. The fact is that we couldn't get beyond the label, and as a result of that, I was always going to be inadequate for the position. In other words, I did not have a place at the table as an executive director of an agency. I could work for an agency, but you cannot lead an agency. And so we had to create a space for us to actually have our own ingenuity, our lived experience, to be able to actually pull those things out into like frameworks that created a change in the trajectory. The innovation came out of these lived experiences that came over time. It seemed to me like we were in the best position. It's like if a ship, right? If a ship hits a glacier and is about to sink, right? And there's 3 levels. There's like the folks that are on the second tier, which are like well-to-do. There's the top tier, which is the captain and all his friends, right? Those are like the royal elite. And then the well-to-do folks in the second tier and what their environment looks like. There's a whole teaching we do with this boat metaphor. And then there's the bottom. Those at the bottom. I knew I was at the bottom.
You're in steerage.
But so the impact is at the bottom.
Right.
The impact is closest. We're the closest to the point of impact, whether that be, we knew the economic recession was going to hit before it ever hit. We knew things were going to happen. We knew trends before they ever happened. We had intel about things that were going to happen long before law enforcement even knew about it. So we were the ones closest to the impact. We knew what was going on with our families. We knew what was going on with the schools. We knew what was going on with our lack of representation. We knew we didn't have a voice in these decisions. And we knew that this needed to be repaired. So what did we do? We needed to work with somebody, right, to repair that, because we're the ones that are in closest proximity to the point of impact. But we also need the captain now to be able to actually take the information, take the data, and make the necessary changes in the trajectory or the direction that we're going in. And so I feel as though we're the ones that are there at the point. We knew that, but we needed to create a space for ourselves where we can actually get to the point that we mustered up enough data, right? Enough support that we can actually go to scale with some of these things. We incubated, we created a thinkubator of folks that were close to the point of impact, and now our ideas were now flourishing. So I made it my job initially was to go into the most difficult places and recruit out of those neighborhoods, what we called healing the hood. Right? We called our first campaign Healing the Hood. But we first got to reach the hood if we got to teach the hood and heal the hood, right? So went out there and started creating block parties in Stribley Park out east, in Van Buskirk Park out southwest, southeast at Williams Brotherhood Park, held events out there, handball tournaments, basketball games, and started to introduce our concept. And it resonated. It resonated broadly. And so we were able to create inroads with the community that was, again, closest to the point of impact. Met with some of the Southeast Asian brothers and sisters, right? And actually held circles with them. Brought them together with some of our native circles. Brought them together with some of our Chicanos. Brought them together with some of our African Americans. And then all of a sudden we started creating movement. Now we got a movement. Now you can no longer just attack me. So it really became, that's when it became, and not only that, but society started changing too. We started realizing we could no longer lock our way out of a problem, and there was no way to promote public safety. It was actually really, really distorted sense of safety. Mm-hmm. That you would create bigger walls in suburbia, and build walls around the neighborhood, and these walls would protect us. That's no way. And we found out very quickly you are not safe behind the safe walls of suburbia, because we share the same community. What happens to me in my neighborhood in South Stockton is going to affect you up in your Spanos Park area as well, right? There might be a different approach to it. There might be a different experience with it. But let us be very clear that this is a universal kind of a struggle. And whether y'all like it or not, the reality is that what happens in the South is going to affect you in the North. But we've been divided, haven't we? We've been segregated, haven't we? We know what segregation feels like. We know that we're not wanted. But I think we needed to force the issue, because at this point it was about our survival and about our children and our posterity, right? So I think all of these things started happening. I think society started changing. I think there was a few different things that occurred. We got rid of some of the politicians that were the most corrupt members of Congress. Pombo was guilty. It's well documented in the halls of Congress that he was one of the most corrupt members of Congress, and he represented us out here. I remember having a meeting with one of the legislators back then and seeing all these prisons all around us surrounding us. We're surrounded by prisons. We've got CYA, DVI, we got now the California Healthcare Facility. We got all these prisons along prison corridor, prison alley, B99 corridor, right? That's the backbone of California. You're going to tell me you're going to build prisons all up and down the backbone of California? That is crazy, because that is an investment of our public dollars, and our public budget is it's a reflection of our public values. So it became to the point that you couldn't, that we were ahead of schedule, frankly, because I remember having the conversation, how are you going to build another prison? And you know what they told me? Because we can. No one's going to do anything about it. So that was the challenge, and we started organizing around schools, yes, prisons, no. And that was before it was popular. So we were definitely targeted a lot. I think that people didn't know what to make of us, make of me. I think I was kind of an anomaly to them. Like, who are you, and why are you here, and why are you, you know what I'm saying? I felt like that because I sensed it. I would walk into places, and their look was like, you feel it. You can feel it. And so all of this kind of created even more of a need for us to continue to organize this and start to build a base. And we built our base. And so now we're at a point that we have some of the most successful programs in our county. Actually, the successful program in our county, at least for AB 109 reentry. We have the lowest recidivism rate of anyone else in the county at 10.8%. Arguably, maybe even the best in the state. I'm not even sure. I need to do some research on that. But I was told firsthand by the chief of probation that you guys have the best results year after year after year with your contracts. Even though we've been hated on a lot by folks, right? We get hated on quite a bit, actually. They throw shade on us all the time. But the data speaks for itself, and that's why we're able to do the work. Is because there's no denying our efficacy, right? We're good at what we do, like I said before. And then also in terms of the Positive Justice Initiative, we also have the high self-referral rate of kids that are disengaged from everything else, but they engage with us. And so we have a successful track record with juvenile young people in the juvenile justice system impacted youth is what we call them. And now we're crafting our own policies now. And so we're often tapped on the shoulder to speak up at various hearings regarding the changes, this reform agenda that's crashing down around us with respect to the criminal justice system. And now we're offering trauma-informed care, clinical services to folks that have often had access to probation officers, but rarely had access to therapists that have been traumatized over time, and over generations, right? And so we're in a very unique position. We can integrate all of our teachings, whether it's the mobilizing and organizing work on the ground around systemic issues that are creating some of the conditions, frankly, to the reentry work and wraparound kind of services and case management that has, again, one of the best rates in the county, some of the best rates in the results in the state. And now we have this community-based healing and treatment that we're able to offer and layer over this. So I think that the innovations came from the young people realizing that there was a gap, even though they couldn't articulate it. They said something is wrong in our society. There's an imbalance. They might not have used those words, but they knew something was up, right? And so once they started realizing and started organizing their data, started telling a story about, and they started asking questions, how did we get here then? Well, this is how we got here. And then you start realizing that there's folks that are actually, who's responsible for these conditions now? Who's responsible for Southside still being the same over 30 years ago? Now we have a bank out there, which we're like happy about, but you can't even get an apple, but you can surely get a gun quicker than you can get an apple out there, right? Right. And I think that's the kind of society that was created, and that's because we did not participate. And now we need to not only participate in our own liberation and healing, we need to participate in the democratic process and make the democratic process democratic, right? With our representation at the table. So I actually ended up running for a school board some time ago. And the first thing that they did was send the media, they being whoever they are that is opposition to the change that is happening, regardless whether they like it or not, things are going to change. We are not going to deal with we're not going to be settled and happy or with the default history that we have. We are rewriting our future, and we have a pen in hand and are putting it to paper and conceptually creating that future, and it's working, right? It's working. We're gaining momentum. Stockton is one of those cities again now. It was not the place of it was the place of last resort, not first choice. But now it's becoming the place of like, wait a minute, what's going on in Stockton right now? There's something amazing. It's not just the crazy mayor either. I think there's a lot of other things that are going on right now. There's a lot of things that are going on. The world is starting to realize that there's something that Stockton has to offer the rest of the world, because as Stockton goes, so does the state of California. So does the region. As a region goes, so does the state. As the state goes, so does the country. Right. And I recall sitting with somebody some time ago before this change started happening, another funder, actually, at one of the largest health foundations in the nation. And I remember sitting with the sister. Actually, I'd been connected by another mutual friend, and I remember him saying, "Hey, we're gonna go meet with her. You gotta get dressed up. You gotta look good." And so I got my suit on again, that same suit probably that I had for years, right? And I got my suit, and it was all nice and pressed, and I was just feeling good that day. And I went to go see her, and she goes, "I used to work in the legislature, and then I worked in the media. And anytime we'd have to get a call from Stockton, we used to hate it. We used to hate in the media to go to Stockton. It's like, we all knew it as the armpit. It's like the armpit of California." She goes, and I don't think much has changed. And that was a few years ago. When we first started, I was like, these were the conversations I was having with philanthropists and policymakers.
Right.
And it was really one-sided. It was like so bizarre to me. Like, so anyway, so I responded to her. I go, and I don't know if she was trying to trigger me to like react in a certain way, but I said, sister, I don't know about you, but this morning I got up and I showered up and I got my suit out and and before I put on my suit, after I got out of the shower, before I put on my suit, I put on some deodorant. Because I don't care how well you dress it up. If you don't take care of your armpit, the rest of you is going to stink. You know what I'm saying? And she laughed. And she goes, that's really good. And I go, no, but it's really important that you understand what I'm saying is that it's time we start taking care of the armpit. Because the rest of California is starting to stink now. The rest of California is suffering what has been happening in Stockton for generations.
Sure.
We have been isolated. We have been disregarded. We have been underinvested in. We have been overlooked for whatever reason. And there's no excuse now because I'm talking to you now. So what is your excuse for overlooking and disregarding Stockton now? They can no longer do that no more. So there's a lot of newfound interest in Stockton. And this has been what I've been doing up and down the state, up and down the nation, all the way to the all the way to the White House, right? So I presented last year at the White House around this very issue. And now there's starting to be this interesting, subtle, but yet dramatic shift in the trajectory of Stockton.
Well, and that brings us back to Michael Tubbs, right? And we're doing our main story on basically the lead on Michael Tubbs because of basically what you just spoke about, right? The whole idea that there's a shift and change. He's another person who came back, grew up here, and et cetera. So I wanted to go back to, you talked about I grew up in Stockton, so I remember people like Ralph Lee White, right, and all of the whole chain of a variety of dysfunctional city council, board of supervisors, corruption,
school board, all
of it. So the sea change, right? I mean, you're part of it. Michael Tubbs is part of it. Provide the audience a little bit of kind of insight and an example of how important it is for a nonprofit leader, a nonprofit organization, and a boots on the ground organization working with someone like a city council or a board of supervisor to make the policy change, but the structural change.
The practices, the community defined practices, the policy changes that will unlock new opportunity, and also the relationships, right, that need to be strengthened. So, first of all, I met Michael when he was still a young man in the YAC, the Youth Advisory Committee, and prior to that, I knew Michael because I knew Grandma. I was organizing with Grandma, Barbara.
I'm meeting her tomorrow and talking.
So you mentioned my name, and she'll tell you she was always so proud of Michael, and I think I wouldn't be. I don't think I would be out of line to say that I think when he was going off to, because they all knew he was a rock star, right? And that he was going to go on and do beautiful things and amazing things, and that when he was going off to Stanford, I remember talking to Barbara, and she was super happy, and I think she was troubled by the fact that he wanted to come back. My feeling to Stockton, and I think part of that is because you want better for your kids. You want better for your children. You want better for your children's children, certainly, right? You want your children to have all the opportunities and advantages that perhaps that missed you, right? But I remember Michael even then being a very, very masterful facilitator. And that's not an easy task, especially for anybody, let alone a 16-year-old young black kid, right, from South Stockton. And he was in a room with mostly affluent white kids, and I respected him for the way he conducted himself, and he kind of drove the agenda. So I knew then already, man, this guy's a rock. This guy's going to be doing some amazing things later on, right? So when he decided to come back, we sat down. First of all, Barbara told me he's going to come back and he wants to run for office. You're going to support my Michael, aren't you? And I go, Barbara, I don't think that's a question. I think that's more of a directive, but yes, absolutely. I think we should sit down. And before he moved in here, we're out there in Cherokee on the fringes. Cause that's what they do to people like us, you see. They put us out on the fringes. They segregate us. They avoid us. That's the number one factor in dysfunctional families and communities is isolation and avoidance. And so, fortunately, we're out there and we're able to, again, continue to incubate our work, right? And so when Michael ran, I was definitely enthused. First of all, it wasn't just an easy like yes, a blanket endorsement. He sat down with me and some of our young folks that were mostly impacted by these systems that had been through again these difficult situations, these adverse situations that just it's just even amazing that they even still show up. You know what I mean? Like and then having to answer their questions. I said I want to meet with you, but I want you to meet with our folks. Not just with me. I want you to meet with our folks because we as a community we endorse. You know, I can't endorse as an agency, but we can endorse as individuals, right? Who are we going to support that supports me?
Right.
What keeps me up at night? Are you going to support what keeps me up at night? What I lose sleep over? What I wrestle over? Are you going to support that? And I remember even prior to this, his predecessor, well, actually the mayor's predecessor, I should say. I remember going to. So I've always been involved. I made the connection really early on with the social conditions in the neighborhood, and the policymakers and their willingness or lack thereof of representing those needs in the neighborhood. And so I even supported. I supported Carlos. I on a personal tip went door to door. And I put in a lot of work in sweat equity. Supported many other folks, but I think those are the ones that stand out to me was like Carlos and Michael, especially because Carlos kind of put out a hit piece on me later on, which kind of really was to his demise, frankly, because times have changed. I don't think he's keeping track of how times have changed. That's how out of step you are with the rest of the world here and the rest of this community, right? Because a lot of his staunch supporters jumped ship on him after that, frankly, and were really angry that he did that. But anyway, so Michael, when he was running, he actually sat down with us, went out there to the outskirts of Stockton, and sat down with us. And at that point, I made a decision. I said, I'm going to support you, man. I feel like you really are. I give it to you, man. What you lack for in experience, you make up for in just intellect and sheer desire to make a difference, man. And I think that's much more important to me than 30 years in office. Do you have the intellect and do you have the gumption and do you have the courage, the moral fiber, the moral courage, the moral fortitude to challenge the status quo in this community? Because that's exactly what we are all about. We embody that. And so, and I think he, by even running, changed the discourse. But now he's completely done it by securing the position he was after. And I would say that he's going to secure the mayor's seat as well. And he'll be the youngest, first black mayor. The youngest who happens to be black mayor in Stockton's history, from what I gather. Which is a testament, not to him, to us. To us as a society, that we are no longer dealing with the status quo and people that harm our community, that get into office and just turn their back on the people that they serve. I'll tell you one thing about Michael. One thing that you can bank on. He shows up in the community. You ask any of these other folks, especially that represent South Stockton, how often do they really show up in the community? Not at their mansion, not for just a special interest group, but if we're having something in McKinley Park in the neighborhood with community members, do you show up? Yes, he shows up. No big old hoop, no big old grand stage. Just show up and show up with the people. That to me shows a lot about an individual. I think that also we as a community need to keep all of them grounded. All politicians need to be. We need to hold their feet to the fire. Well, this is a new time right now, man. The times are changing, and there is definitely a groundswell of people that are now participating in this process, and I think they have a big stake in the outcome of this. And so I think again that we are starting to see that. We're starting to see and sense our own power as a people, and no longer leaving it up to the traditional power players to make decisions about us and for us that actually have really done harm to us.
Thank you. It's really good.
You're welcome. That's it. Appreciate you.